with a question. And if you're feeling comfortable with this, I wanted to ask you which of these five is not a bee. And I, rather than ask you to turn on your microphones because you might not feel comfortable with that, I'm putting numbers on them, and you can put that in the chat if you want. 1 through 5, from left to right. Anybody brave enough to guess which one is not a bee? I love this. Okay, we've got lots of different answers. That's exciting. Okay, cool. I'm going to reveal I'll reveal the answer now, but then I'll tell you why later. It's number 2. So, which is a fly. And I can see why you would think 4 and 5 are not bees. So let's get in there. Okay. Why should we care about pollinators to start? Well, most flowering plants need an animal pollinator in order to reproduce. They basically can't make seeds and fruits if they don't have help, and most of them aren't getting enough of it. So the majority of studies, when we look at this, find that plant reproduction is limited by not getting enough pollen, so not enough help from those animals. And here in British Columbia, we know that about 1/3 of our birds and mammals eat pollinator-dependent fruits and seeds. So if you mostly care about things like bears and birds, well, they need pollinators too, as do we. You might have heard this saying, 1 out of 3 bites you eat is thanks to a bee. And sometimes people make that 1 out of 3 bites you eat is thanks to a honeybee, and that's just wrong. There is one honeybee on this slide. It's the one in the upper left here, on the apple blossom. All the rest are not honeybees. And in fact, the one on the world's most important food group, chocolate, in the lower right, is a midge. It's a tiny little fly about the size of a mosquito. Thank you for the chocolate. And so anything that visits a flower can be a pollinator. Pollination is just moving pollen from one place to another. So any visitor can be important, even that midge. But in southern British Columbia, which is where I've live and work, bees are doing most of that work. And that's because they visit flowers more to collect pollen and to collect nectar that they feed to their offspring. And the other pollinator pictures that are on this slide, the bottom row, those are things like beetles and flies and butterflies and birds. They feed their offspring something else if they feed them at all. And so they just don't visit flowers very often. So forgive me if I mostly talk about bees today because they do most of the work. And we have a lot of them. We have almost 500 species of bee in British Columbia, which is probably why showing those pictures at the beginning, it's hard to know what's a bee and what's not because they look, in many cases, not a lot like what you think. And they're also in trouble. This is an old cover of Time magazine when we first started worrying about bees, which is around 2007, when honeybees were in trouble. The reasons that bees are challenged uh, these days, let me get rid of that, is for 3 reasons. And I'm going to talk about each of them in turn, right? So the first one is diseases. This little bumblebee, you might notice that her wings look funny. She has something called deformed wing virus. So it's a viral disease that she actually catches from other bees, usually on flowers when they come into contact with each other, or sometimes the virus particles are just left behind on the flower. And diseases they're natural, they're always out there in the world, but what we are seeing in the last few decades is an increase in disease transmission from managed bees to wild bees. So in this case, this bumblebee caught the virus from honeybees that were managed for crop pollination. Next is pesticides. It's the thing that I think we all want to be the number one reason because we can see an answer to that. I found this picture online and I'm so curious what they're spraying because in Canada, anyway, you're not allowed to spray anything that might have a negative impact on an insect while the crop is in bloom. And that's to protect our pollinators. And yet pesticides, the whole purpose is to kill insects. And even organic farmers use them. Most farmers need them in order to produce the kind of stuff we are willing to eat. But this is, of course, mostly a problem on farms. It's something that we can choose not to do in land that is under our control. And then the third thing is habitat loss. This is a strawberry field in California. And you can see it just goes on forever. And as much as we like eating strawberries, and as much as bees might like pollinating strawberries, if it's the only thing you got to eat for a month or so at a time, you'd probably be feeling pretty sick too. And that's basically what happens. If they're eating just one thing, they're unwell. They're not getting complete nutrition. And so loss of habitat, this change of habitat from the natural state to mostly growing food for people, that's mostly why we lose habitat, is not so good for pollinators. And these three things, the diseases, the pesticides, the habitat loss, all interact for pollinators. And so if a bee has caught a disease, it's been exposed to a disease, it's more likely to get sick if it's eating only one pollen, if its nutrition is bad because of habitat loss. And if it's also then exposed to pesticides, it's less likely to recover from that disease. So it sounds awful, and yet, while some of these things sound really kind of scary, they're really not issues for most pollinators in all parts of the world. Both pesticides and diseases are more of an issue in managed lands, in places where we're farming. Habitat loss doesn't have to be. Can they recover from a disease? Great question. Thanks for asking in the chat. I love that. Yes, it depends on what the disease is. So this bee that in the picture with the deformed wings will never be able to fly, but she doesn't die. In other cases, they're able to fight off a parasite or another disease-causing agent if they're really healthy, just like we do. Like if you catch the flu, you can get over it if you don't have other things that make you unwell. So that's true for pollinators as well. Disease, though, is more of a problem again when they're around managed insects. So that's on farms. Pesticides are on farms. Habitat loss is the thing that all of us can do something about. And that's because all animals basically need food and lodging, just like we do. And gardens can compensate for that habitat loss. Whether this is my front yard, um, or whether you just have some pots of flowers on a balcony, you can do something that helps the pollinators. You don't have that option with like a polar bear. But for pollinators, we can do something about it, which is really empowering. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to, wait, this popped up again. I'm just going to get rid of it again. I'm going to introduce you to our pollinators in British Columbia because in my experience, when people learn about pollinators and they get interested in them, they get past the idea that these are bugs and they can sting you in a good way. So that's what I'm going to try to do, tell you a bit about how cool they are, and then I'm going to talk a bit about how you can support pollinators with plants. Okay, and I'm going to start with this bee, which is the bee that many of us know well. I sometimes talk to groups, and this is the only bee they know. The honeybee is originally from Northern Africa and Southern Europe, and the colonial settlers brought honeybees to North America for their honey production, and now they're also used for crop pollination. And so they've been introduced around the world, and I think many of us really love honey. So I don't want to say they're bad necessarily, but they can compete with our native bees. And they're at the same time incredibly important in agriculture, and that's worth explaining. So this is an almond farm in Southern California where 80% of the almonds that we eat in North America are grown. Almond trees look a lot like a cherry tree or an apple tree, and each one of those little flowers needs to be pollinated, needs to be visited by a pollinator in order to make an almond nut. There's a lot of them. And they are almost done blooming. They bloom in February when, even in Southern California, the bees aren't out to pollinate them. And if you read Winnie the Pooh as a child, you might remember that the bees lived in the hollow tree. So that's what honeybees would normally live in. They live, and because of that, we can encourage them to live in a hollow log substitute, a box, And we can put that box on a panel van or on an 18-wheeler and we can bring it wherever we need pollination. And the reason this works is because honeybees are social. They have a queen and tens of thousands of workers that all work together as a single colony. And that's different from pretty much every other bee. Of our 480 something bees in British Columbia, less than 20 are social, and they don't have colonies the size of honeybee. So they're not very good at conventional agriculture pollination because those farms are so big. Um, but again, we need honeybees for that work. But I think a lot of our ideas about bees, about what, how there's a queen bee and there's a colony and all, all these things about what they look like even, are based on this one bee. And that's why I like to start by showing you lots of pictures of bees that don't look like what you expect. And so in this series of photos, the bee is on the right. So bees can look like wasps. Oh, and I should say, if I haven't put a name on the photo, I took it and it's from British Columbia. So these are bees that we would find here. You would find them in your backyard. That cuckoo bee, I took that picture in my yard. Okay, so they can look like wasps. Here's another one that looks like a wasp, but it's a bee. Another one that looks like a wasp. So you may know mason bees. They come in various pretty metallic colors. And so that was bee number 5 on the opening slide was a mason bee. Some people think mason bees look a bit like blowflies, which are metallic as well. And here's a blue one. The blue orchard bee looks a lot like a blowfly. I don't know if any of you have mason bee condos, in your yard or on your balcony. This is the bee that you would be attracting with those nests. And flies and bees can all look alike too. This whole yellow and black thing that they're doing, that's to look scary. It's like saying, "Woo, I can sting," and so things like birds would maybe be a little bit more timid around them. But the reality is, of course, those flies can't sting. They're just pretending that they can. This is a fly that's been introduced to North America along with the honeybee. The drone fly or hoverfly looks a lot like a honeybee. Fools me sometimes. So does this bulb fly. Bulb flies with a fuzzy red bum, so it looks just like a red-tailed bee. And there's a robber fly that looks like a red-tailed bee too, really fuzzy and orange and yellow. And these are predators. They fly around and catch other insects in the air and eat them. And then there's even a moth that looks like a bumblebee. This is the snowberry clearing moth, and she lays her eggs on snowberry plant. They eat the leaves, and again, they look an awful lot like bumblebees too. Okay, these are not from British Columbia. These bees are from Australia and from Central America. But I just like pointing out that yes, bees can be blue and they can have polka dots. So they can look kind of nothing like what you think. Although some of the bees in British Columbia are pretty cool, reds and greens and that lovely turquoise color on the right. And they vary a lot in size. So this is the largest and the smallest bee in North America. And we have the little bee here in BC, but not the big bee. The big bee is a carpenter bee and it gets into Southern Oregon. There's another kind of carpenter bee that we would see in Ontario and Quebec. There's a little size bar in the lower left. That's a millimeter. So that little bee is only 2.5 millimeters long. It's tiny and it's resting on the head of the carpenter bee. So we have tiny things like that here that you would never think were a bee. So the way you know it's a bee is that they're vegetarians. So they eat pollen and nectar and they grab and collect the pollen and the nectar from flowers to bring back to the colony and feed to their offspring. And all those other things like wasps and flies, if they feed their offspring, well, wasps are predators, so they feed their offspring garden pests like caterpillars and aphids. So you like them, even if you think you don't. And same thing, hoverflies are often really great aphid eaters. They're predators. Okay. Not vegetarian. Okay. So how can you recognize a bee? I've shown you all these pictures just to kind of, show you the diversity, but also you're now like, well, I don't know what a bee is now. So a bee has four wings and long antennae, where flies only have two wings and their antennae are short. I'll show you some pictures. And they're usually fuzzy. Wasps have less hair and they're often silvery. But I showed you a bunch of pictures of bees that aren't very furry at all. Like they don't all look like a bumblebee. So the real thing, and this is science, I am a scientist, is that they're really cute. And they have these really cute faces. And if you don't believe me, I'm sure we could prove this empirically if we compare them to the faces on the bottom of the slide. So I especially like pointing out the difference with wasps. So this cute little bee here in the middle, that's black and yellow, has this cute little round face, whereas things like yellow jackets, look at the big jaws, right? That's because they're predators. So they just look mean, right? And then if we compare this green one with this green bee. So wasps often have their antennae inserted really low on their face. I say low criminal foreheads. It just makes them less cute than the ones up here with their antennae high up that just look a little happier. And flies have big bug eyes. And you can see those short antennae, but it's really the big eyeballs that usually get people thinking, oh, I get it now. That's not a bee. So if you see it from the back end, it's harder than if you see it from the front. So again, bees on the left with their cuter faces, they're often fuzzy. On the right, we've got some flies with their big eyes. You can see the big eyes even in the pictures on top that are taken from a distance. And this is the one from the opening slide. It's called a tangled wing fly, and you can see it has the big bulging eyeballs, right? Well, I guess they're not eyeballs technically. They're eyes though. Um, and then Oh, it's not advancing. There we go. Then with the wasps, so again, the differences in the faces, the cuteness factor, and the two on the right have a wasp waist. You might have heard of that. They have a skinnier waist than the ones on the left. So this honeybee doesn't have that skinny waist the way this yellow jacket does. And then this is the bee that was from the beginning that at least one person guessed, and I thought you might, was a wasp because look at the coloring, right? But I've told you that coloring is not always a good indicator. It doesn't have that skinny wasp waist, and I hadn't shown you a picture of the face. I had to find one online. They're much cuter. The other thing to show you here is that this honeybee on the left has pollen on her leg. So because bees are provisioning a nest, they have to transport that pollen and nectar back to the nest. And anything like a wasp or a fly won't do that. So the other thing to do is to look for um, visible pollen on the bee, on an insect. If you see visible pollen, it's probably a bee. So here I've circled it. And what I purposely chose these pictures to show you a couple of things. Um, One is that yes, most bees do put pollen on their leg. I know, isn't it cool? But the one on the center bottom, this one on the purple campanula, has the pollen underneath her belly. And then, yeah, I purposely put in this one with the blue pollen. So we tend to think that pollen is yellow, but it isn't always. It can be blue, like on this scilla. This is not a native species here, but some people plant it in their gardens. This is red pollen from a lupin. It can be pink. It can be all sorts of different colors. Yes, it's mostly yellow or white, but it can be pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay. Um, Notice though that I say female bees, so I think I'm safe to say this today. I usually have a man say this next part. Uh, Male bumblebees are lazy. You can see gangs of them sitting around on flowers in July and August, and in between drinking, they go looking for mates. So male bees don't do any work. They don't collect pollen and nectar. They really just have one purpose, and that is to mate with the female. That's science for you. And I'm dating myself with this B movie. I had to look it up. It came out in 2007, so it's a little embarrassing. But I remember when it came out, I was like, wait, Jerry Seinfeld is a worker bee, and those ones in the background are worker bees? No, they're males. It's totally wrong. They don't do any work. So If you ever get nostalgic and watch Bee Movie again, just know they got the biology completely wrong. It should have all been women, girl power. But the cool thing about male bees is they don't sting. They don't have the equipment. Only females have the equipment. It's actually evolutionarily, it's derived from an ovipositor, from the egg laying device. So that means if you can tell that a bee is a boy, you could pet it and hold it in your hand and it can't hurt you, which is kind of cool. So we need to talk a little bit more about male bees because of the cuteness factor. Um, because they don't do any work, they're not welcome in the nest. They're not allowed. The females won't let them in, and so they sleep on flowers, which is just so cute. These bees in the upper left here are all huddled together on a single sunflower in the desert because in deserts it gets really cold at night. And so they need that for warmth. And that's what's happening in this bad overexposed picture. It's in a tulip at dusk that I took several years ago. All the bees coming together to huddle together for warmth. And the picture on the right you might have seen online, like it's on social media a lot, the one in the orange flower. And they're always saying, oh, how pretty these cute female bees are tired from working. It's like, no, those are boys and they're tired from looking for girls all day long. And how do I know that these are all boys? Well, in addition to the behavior, see how fuzzy this guy's face is? And you can see it over here too. Boy bees have mustaches. You can't make this stuff up. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures where the boy bee is on the right-hand side. Um, Mustache. Male bees also have an extra segment in their antennae. This is an exaggerated case. That's something you probably wouldn't notice most of the time, but yeah, mustache, lovely facial hair on this one, a cute little brush mustache. Even bumblebees, males are smaller because they're not laying eggs. So they're smaller, they're fuzzier, and they have yellow faces, lots of facial hair. It's really cute. My favorite. This is a species of mason bee. It's not here, but even has like fur on its mandibles, on its little jaws. So cute. Looks like a bunny. Um, you might have heard that honeybees can sting just once, and this is true. Um, Honeybees have a little barb on the end of their stinger, and so when they sting you, it gets stuck in your skin. And as the bee pulls away, her guts come out because they're attached to the stinger that is in your skin. And then there's a venom sac, and it keeps pumping venom into you for up to 7 minutes. Ugh. Uh, why? Well, I said before, there's a queen and there's a colony of 10,000 sisters. And there's a lot of sisterhood to protect. So they've evolved a way to make sure all the venom goes into you at the sacrifice of a worker. And you can sacrifice a worker to protect the rest of the sisterhood if you are a social bee like a honeybee. But a solitary bee, that wouldn't make sense. If this little solitary mining bee on my finger was to lose her life if she stung me, then she would not be able to raise the rest of her brood. She wouldn't be able to do that work. She doesn't have sisters to help her. Um, and and so she could sting me as often as she likes, but clearly she doesn't like. She's not stinging me. They're pretty docile. And in fact, mining bees, their stingers are so weak, they're not very good at penetrating human skin. Another fact you learned tonight. Okay. Um, okay, there we go. How do you tell the different kinds of bees apart? So I'm going to tell you this because what do they use their stingers for? So I'm going to go back. So they can defend against other kinds of organisms. So they can sting, so human skin, even like deer hide is too thick for their stingers to go through, but they can sting other things. They could sting other insects that are coming into their hive. They could, especially ones that are called cuckoo bees that like try to take over the nest. So it's still used for defense, but it just doesn't work so good against big vertebrates like us. Thanks for asking, Danielle. Okay. All right. So to tell them apart, You check the bee's knees, you look for where their pollen is. And this is worth explaining because it tells you so much about how they're using the land around you where you're noticing them. So bumblebees put their pollen in a ball on their leg just like a honeybee does. And that's the way I think we're used to thinking about pollen, if we think about pollen at all. Mining bees, on the other end, have what we call pollen pants. So the pollen is all the way from their ankles up to their waist. They even have special carrying devices up on their waist. So it's their whole pollen pants. And mason bees are hairy belly bees, so they put their pollen under their abdomen. And once we know this, we know a lot about how they're using the environment, as I said. Um, and specifically how they nest. So, as I've mentioned in a couple of different places, most bees are solitary in British Columbia. A single female initiates and provisions a nest, and most of them are active in springtime. And they can nest either in the ground or in stems. And if you see where the pollen is, you'll know where that is. So if we look at this little cycle on the right-hand side, they'll come out soon. We often see the first in southern British Columbia. We see the first solitary bees late March, early April. So they'll come out and mate. Then they'll forage and provision their nests. They do that for about a month to a month and a half. They don't live very long at all. Then the adults all die. The larvae will develop underground or in the stem, depending on what kind of bee it is. And then they spend the winter that way and they emerge the next year. So each species has just one generation a year, and the time that they're active is set. Okay. And how far they forage when they're doing this foraging part in the top depends on their body size. So remember that little 2 millimeter bee, that tiny, tiny bee, maybe 15 or 20 meters. A bumblebee, which is big, might go 2 kilometers. So they might be spending their whole lives right in your backyard. Okay, so ground nesting bees, mining bees and sweat bees. These are the ones with the pollen pants, the one on my finger. They include some metallic bees. See this bright green one? Pretty cool. And they vary a lot in size. So the finger is a good size estimate, I think, for you. But this little bee on the purple flower on the lower left, that's Bacopa. If you're a gardener at all and you know I call it the hanging basket plant. It comes in purple and white, tiny little flowers. That bee is maybe 3 or 4 millimeters. It's very tiny. And they nest in the ground, so you might actually see something like this and think it's ants. They like really bad lawn, which is why I have them. They and you see these little piles of soil and it's probably bees, but you might not be sure, right? Unless you see them. So I have a video if it runs. There we go. Oh, it's a little jerky. Oh, there we go. Can you see how the bees are flying close to the ground? Can you see all that movement? Yeah. Okay, so and I can hit play again. Um, and so you see there's lots of holes and they're flying low to the ground. They're looking for their hole. So they all like the same conditions, but each hole is a separate bee. And yeah, they're looking for their nest, or they're looking for a new place to dig a nest. And so obviously if you see that flying activity, that's not ants. Cool, eh? Um, and this is what the nest looks like from inside. This little bee is about a half an inch or a centimeter long. She's not that big. And the ruler, if you look at it, goes to 5 inches or about 12 centimeters. So that tiny little bee digs all the way down that far. She lines the hollow that she's made. You can see it's shiny. She waterproofs it using some stuff that comes off of her mandibles because it has to, remember, last through the winter to next spring. It has to be waterproof. Fills it with pollen, lays an egg, and then that little larvae will develop and eat all that pollen. She does this 12 to 20 times. She lays that many eggs, but then she pretty much dies of exhaustion, right? That's a lot of work for that little bee. Um, the hairy belly bees, remember the pollen under the abdomen, right? Hairy belly bees. These are the mason bees and the leafcutter bees. So if you have a mason bee house, this is the kind of bee you have. They also include beautiful metallic bees, Sometimes it's not so obvious. The bee on the lower left is really kind of bluish, but it depends on the light. And they don't range that much in size. They tend to be chubby little bees, really cute. So if you have a mason bee nest, let's look at the upper right? So this is like a little bee condo you could buy. Um, and you could see there's a plug of mud. That's why they're called mason bees. They build walls out of mud. So if we took this house that's kind of going back into the screen and we turn it sideways, that's what this is, this tube. It's been turned like 90 degrees so that we can look at it. So we have a bunch of pollen, we have the little developing larvae, and we have a mud wall. And then she does it again, mud wall, does it again. An individual bee probably fills only two of the holes in your mason bee house, three if she's really doing well. And again, then she dies. Um, One of the names, well, the scientific name for this group of bees is Megachilidae. It means big teeth. And those teeth, they look nasty, but they use them for collecting the mud, and for other nest construction. And the male bees will bite you to get you to let them go, as I know from personal experience, since remember, they don't have a stinger. They have mustaches, no stingers. Mason bees are great for tree pollinators. They're great to have in your space. Leafcutter bees come out in summer, more like June, July. Then they use leaves. So again, there's a nest in the upper left so you can see what it looks like. And here's a little bee carrying a piece of leaf back to her nest. This is a plant in my garden, and you can see the holes that are cut out around the edge of the leaf, harvested by the bee. So if you have these very precise round or oval pieces of leaf taken out, the ovals are used along the length um, of the egg that she's protecting, and the round pieces are used to plug the end of the hole. You don't have caterpillars or something bad. You have bees. Yay! They'll nest in these tubes, but this one also they like nesting underneath paving stones. That's where I have them in my yard. I think it's nice and warm under that warm rock. And this is again that hairy belly bee. If you have campanula or bellflower, they love that. So that's why I think I have them. And then I wanted to show you Carter bees. So they're not native to British Columbia. They've been introduced from Europe, and they're in the same family. They're hairy belly bees, and they have those big jaws too, and they use plant hair to line their nest. So this little bee has been pulling the hairs off of the stem, and you can see there's little bare patches along the stem of my lamb's ear, and that's collecting the plant hairs to line her nest. That's why they're called carder bees. If anyone here is a knitter, carding wool is like combing the wool. Yeah, that's why they have that common name because they're collecting fuzz to use in their nests. They're really cool looking. Okay. Um, and again, they're not social, and they'll all use the same nest block if you have it there. So I've got here, this is a mason. Sometimes they use plant resin, sometimes they use leaves. Um, and one thing I like to point out, if you're handy, especially the commercially available ones only have one size of hole. It's usually this bigger size. It's I think 5/16 of an inch. That's what a mason bee likes because that's about the size of her body. But some of these bees have smaller bodies and they would prefer a smaller hole. And so if you're handy and want to make homes for your bees, you might consider that. Okay, bumblebees. So this is the only social group, always social group in BC. We have some other that are semi-social that I'm just gonna set that detail aside. But bumblebees are social the way we think of sociality when we think of honeybees. But their colonies are annual colonies. They also use wax just like honeybees do. So this is a nest made of wax, and you might be able to see the glint of the liquid. There's honey stored in there. It's just not enough for us to steal. They tend to nest in cavities, like abandoned mouse holes. They like smelly things or abandoned bird nest boxes. So this is a chickadee nest box, this photo taken at my friend Linda's house. And that's a bumblebee flying in who made a nest in there. And this is a picture of a nest in a chickadee box that I found online. So I've even seen some queen bees out already. I don't know what they're thinking, but as soon as it's warm, 10 degrees or so, we'll start seeing the queen bees out starting their nest. And eventually that queen will stop leaving the nest. and just become an egg-laying machine. These colonies will get up to about 200, so way smaller than the tens of thousands that honeybees can have. By late summer, she'll make the reproductives for next year, the males and the new queens. They'll mate fall, August, September. And then everybody dies. The males die, all the workers die, and the mated queens spend the winter underground, emerging in spring as soon as it's warm. Um, yeah, so I feel like I forgot something. Just give me a second. Yeah, no, that's all I wanted to say. So the queens that are out now, they were mated last fall and they spent the winter underground. Okay. And I wanted to show another little video. This is one that person named Christine sent to me. It was of a hollow tree in Surrey, and she's like, "Are these bumblebees?" And I said, "Yes, they are." And you know, you might see something like this and think it's a wasp nest. Um, I'm gonna play it again and just you can see it's always hard with the video quality, but they're kind of fuzzy and yellowish and round. And so I think if you came across one, you'd know that they were bumblebees. She was concerned about them. I said, "Oh, they'll be fine. They'll just hang out there now that it's on the ground. They don't care, as long as nobody disturbs it." Yeah. I had last year had bumblebees nesting in my shed wall. They don't care. They are really important pollinators. So I like to tell people that it's really good if you grow food like tomatoes and blueberries. I'll explain a bit later, but those are what's called buzz pollinated. Only bumblebees will do that. And so you want to attract queen bees to your garden early in spring so that they'll set up shop there and you'll get great tomato harvests. Okay, and just a reminder that anything that visits a flower can be a pollinator, flies, wasps, beetles, butterflies, birds. Any of them can do that, but they just don't do as much work because they don't feed their offspring pollen and nectar. I just went into, I'm going to whiz through this, but point out that butterflies lay their eggs on host plants and their caterpillars eat leaves. And so if you want to support butterflies, then you need to plant their host plants. They'll eat anything when it comes to nectar, but they need host plants. So this top one is the anise swallowtail. It needs things from the carrot family like fennel. The middle is a satyr comma, which needs stinging nettle. I've planted stinging nettle in a pot. My husband thinks I'm crazy. Because I'm hoping, this picture I took in my yard, I'm hoping they'll make babies. Mourning cloaks need willow trees, right? So you need the host plants. Hummingbirds we think of as pollinators, but mostly they eat bugs. They need bugs for the protein, and that's what they feed to their chicks. And then things like hoverflies and wasps. This wasp picture, I love this picture. It's holding a caterpillar. This is a hoverfly larva on the bottom. It's eating aphids. They do so much work for you in terms of eating pests in your garden, and so they need that prey. So they don't have nests the way well, hummingbirds do, but the rest don't have nests the way bees do. Okay. So to get back, just spend a little bit of time talking about how to support them. I've stolen the Field of Dreams thing, and I say, if you plant it, they will come. So when we were able to move into our home, there's a big Douglas fir in the front yard. We've estimated it's about 250 years old. It had some ivy growing up the trunk and just this grass planted in front of it. That was it. And I'm not showing a current picture because this picture is old. I have replaced that with diverse flowering plants. And because of that, I even have specialist bees in my yard and they're nesting in my yard. And I figure if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I just want to say very clearly that this can be done on a balcony. You don't need to have a large piece of property. You can do it, of course, in a community garden, but also on a balcony with pots of flowers. Food for the bees is doing so much good work for pollinators, and food for bees, food for you. So the plant on the left, lower left here is a tomato plant, right? That's going to feed the pollinators and feed you. Okay. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about how to look at flowers because I know that you are from all over. The people watching this video or present with me tonight could be from anywhere in British Columbia. And so I know the southern part of the province well, but I'd like to give you some advice that you could apply anywhere you are. And the first bit of advice is if you're shopping for plants or visiting a friend's garden that can give you some plants, just see what the pollinators are visiting. That's what you want to take home with you. Okay, so these are photos from my field sites on Vancouver Island and in the Okanagan. And when I look at these flowers, I can guess what the pollinator probably is. So I'm going to show you how to do that. First, there's flowers that need a long tongue. So this is Mertensia with the long flowers, blue flowers. This is a type of honeysuckle with the long orange flowers. And this is a delphinium on the bottom with that long floral tube. So you need a long tongue. That could be a long tongue bee like a bumblebee, or it could be a butterfly or a hummingbird. I mentioned buzz pollination and I'll come back to it. So a weird flower like the shooting star in the upper left, or even a weird flower like the lupin, that's going to need special treatment. So I'm going to explain that with its own slide. But I just want to also point out the monkey flower and the fairy slipper orchid have what's called a landing platform. So there's spots and there's a flat place to land. And that means bees because, basically it's saying there's one way to orient. Everything else on the slide, from the balsam root to the biscuit root to the opuntia, is more inclusive in terms of the pollinators that they feed. They're what I call easy access flowers, and they are the ones to plant if you want to support more diversity of pollinators in your yard. Not the ones that exclude others, but the ones that include them. Okay. So, but first, I'm just going to talk about those weird things. So, and these support bumblebees, but not other pollinators. So, buzz pollination. This is when the pollen is inside the anther, the male part. This is this cone of yellow in the center of the flower here that the bumblebee is holding onto. The buzz pollination is when the bees vibrate their bodies and it shakes the pollen out of the flower and onto the belly of the bee. It's like shaking salt out of a salt shaker. Shooting stars are like this, tomatoes, as I mentioned, borage, and even blueberry. And the thing is that tomatoes also don't have any nectar, and so honeybees are not going to visit them. And so in our greenhouses where we grow a lot of tomatoes in BC, we put bumblebees. We do put honeybees on blueberry farms because they produce nectar, so the honeybees will visit, but the bumblebees are just much more effective pollinators because honeybees don't have that behavior. They don't buzz. Anything with a long floral tube, I already said, needs to have a long tongue. So like our ribes, these are currants. And I've got two from different parts of the province. We often think of these as hummingbird flowers, but they are also very good for queen bees in the spring. And then all the weird ones need a big bodied bug. So, and you can really see this well in the two pictures on the bottom. So this is turtle head. It looks like a turtle head, doesn't it? And it's native to Eastern Canada. And that bee has had to force her way in there. Same thing with the butter and eggs in the lower right. The bees having to push their way in. They do this on a lupin as well. Only big bees can do this. So you plant a lupin, the bumblebees will love you, but nobody else can get in there. So if you want to support more different kinds of bees, lupin is not the only thing that you should plant. So what should you plant? Easy access flowers, as I mentioned before. And a sunflower is a great mental image to have. It's like a big plate of bee food. It's got all the pollen and all the nectar right there in the center, and anybody can get it. My inclusive plant. And anything in that whole family of the sunflowers, the Asteraceae, is going to be really good pollinator food. Got lots of different things here. It's a mix of plants that are native to BC and things that are garden plants, asters, sedums, even, yes, the little daisies that grow in your lawn. Blanket flower is a native plant, so is this balsam root. Here's that tangling fly again. All of these things are really great to attract pollinators, and we have quite a few bees that specialize on asters in the province. In fact, in the upper left, this happens to be one of them. In my garden, on a non-native plant, on Coreopsis, which is actually native to northeastern North America. But bees don't care. They care that it's an aster. As long as you've got asters, you're good. The carrot family. I've mentioned the carrot family before. This includes our biscuit roots and desert parsleys, the ones on the left. We have specialist bees on these as well. These little mining bees that are in the picture, these two yellow flowered pictures are going to specialize on those. But there are also garden plants that are in this family. I really love masterwort, Astrantia major, but also dill, cilantro, fennel. Even if you let like one or two carrots go to seed for you, or a parsnip go to seed. I mean, mostly you would not let them go that second year. But if you have some of those umbels, anybody can visit them. And that's what this is called, an umbel. And you might notice the ladybug. Ladybugs and hoverflies love things like dill and cilantro. And if you've got them in your garden, you've got pest control against things like aphids. Double duty. Okay. The rose family. So obviously roses, I've got our Nootka rose and our ball-tip rose on this slide, but also salmonberry, thimbleberry. I have pictures here of an apple tree and raspberry being grown in a garden. And again, all the food is right out there, right? You can see all the pollen. I mean, and there's a difference between these native roses where you can see all the pollen and a rose like that, like a tea rose. So there, you might want to have a tea rose. Maybe you think they're beautiful. That's fine. You're allowed, but don't think it's good bee food. You have to be able to see the naughty bits, is what I say. If you could see the naughty bits, the male and female parts of the flower, all that pollen, then it's a good plant for the bees because they can see those naughty bits too. The heath family. Again, a mix of plants that are native to BC and also garden plants. So I've got the blueberry picture on here again. Our native rhododendron, any rhododendron, they love rhododendrons. In the top middle, this is Pyrus japonica, lily of the valley bush. It's really commonly planted in gardens, and you can see the mason bees on it. It comes out around the same time that the mason bees do, so it can tide them over until your cherries are in bloom. And of course, kinnikinick, one of, a really important native plant. I think underplanted in gardens, we all should have it. It's great bee food, people food. It's just, it's a lovely plant. And the mint family. Okay, these are not very inclusive flowers. They're not easy access because they have those flower tubes, right? So if the flower tube is long, like on the bee balm in the lower right, you need to have a long tongue for that. But they have tons of nectar, and so they're just loved by pollinators. Catmint, is like an it's just always covered with buzzing things. This is peppermint. That happens to be a wasp. Everything will go to it. It's just really attractive. And in the upper right is lavender. Lavender is such a great plant for bees. Mostly, again, because the flowers are kind of long, mostly for things like bumblebees, but this picture, this is the endangered Western bumblebee. We were looking for it for years and we could never find it. And when we finally found it, it was in somebody's garden on lavender. And that's when I was convinced that gardens matter for conservation, and I published some papers on that with my student Julie Ray. Um, I have learned when I give all these examples that people want to know, okay, well, what's bad then? It sounds like everything's good. Well, no, not everything's good. So-called bedding plants, right? So things that annual plants that we put out for color because they bloom all year. I mean, yeah, that's great, lots of color, but French marigolds, begonias, the things we call geraniums, but are really pelargoniums, petunias, a lot of action on them. They were like zeros in our study in gardens. And this is where common names are a bit of a problem. Pot marigold is calendula. True geranium. I don't know why we call this thing geranium, but we do. Those are bee friendly. And it's because you can see the naughty bits, right? You could see all the stuff in the middle of that flower, right? So that's what you should look for. Even if these plants are not your cup of tea, if you look for those kinds of characteristics in a plant, you're going to do well. Avoid double and sterile flowers. So sterile flowers have often been bred to prevent seeds from getting established all over. And so there's something good about that, but they usually make extra petals at the cost of anthers. And that's a developmental pathway in a flower. So, instead of making an anther, they make extra petals. So we like the way that looks, but it doesn't look so good to a bee. Again, you want the bottom row. So like a lace cap hydrangea has all that great pollen just visible, nice big plate of food. Okay. So if you want to support pollinators on your balcony or in your yard, lots of different colors, shapes, and sizes means lots of different kinds of pollinators. But prioritize those easy access ones. You'll support more diversity of flower visitors that way than if you just planted something like lupins. Larger patches are better, and I know that can be hard if we're talking about balcony or patio gardening, but it's great if you can have like, a square meter, a big patch of flowers. I think that's why I have that specialist bee now because I plant coreopsis everywhere. It's so dependable and flowers for a long time. And then you want to extend your bloom times. And I'm going to explain this with a graphic, but first I see there's another question. Oh, do I see the? Yes, yes. I hope you wander around the nursery looking for naughty bits and muttering to yourself about it. I sure do. I go to the pollinator table at a nursery and I'm like, well, they say those are pollinator friendly plants, but I'm not seeing a lot of action, but I'm seeing a lot over there. Right. And so I think the things that we're told is dogma for pollinators isn't always. So, but yeah, the bees will tell you. They'll tell you what they like. Okay. Um, anyway, I was just saying about extending the bloom time. So you want to include early and late flowering plants. And here's my graphic for that. So we've studied this in the context of invasive species. Invasive plants would basically be a big monoculture of one thing and will only bloom for one period of time. It's like those strawberries at the beginning of the talk. That flowering season for one plant is usually only 4 to 6 weeks. And that means it would only support the bees and other pollinators that are out during those 4 to 6 weeks. But bees are out at all different times of the year. Our mining bees and mason bees are going to start coming out at the end of March, or so will our bumblebees. They need food early, not in June when the Himalayan blackberry blooms. And then there's things that are out late, including our queen bumblebees that need to get nice and strong so they can make it through the winter, and also some butterflies like skippers. And so planting things that bloom at different times of the year, and my graphic is all native plants. I guess I should name them for you. Oregon grape, red flowering currant, red twig dogwood, snowberry, one of our native roses, fireweed, goldenrod, and aster. Yeah, it's a good way, right, to have all those different times of year. If you want more resources, I'll have these up again at the end, and I put together a handout, and I can't remember if I put them on the handout now. I might have. I hope I did. I like to tell people about the Xerces Society. It's a weird name. It's named after a butterfly, the first butterfly documented to go extinct in North America. But they've got great resources. They have lists of native plants. So if you want more ideas for what to plant, guides for pollinator conservation, plans for making bee nests if you're handy and want to try that. Pollinator Partnership also is a US organization, but they do have a branch in Canada, which Xerces does not there in Portland. And they have regional planting guides. You put in your postal code and they'll give you what your planting guide would be. They have some weird stuff that's not true. They have literature about bats. We have no bats, pollinators in Canada. And then my website has some information. So I'm just going to walk you through this graph because I've got a couple on the website. The graph on the x-axis is numbers 1 through 25. Those were our top 25 most attractive garden plants. And we have this for different ecosystems we've worked in too. And then the different colors are the different kinds of bees. So that's down here in this graphic. So purple is honeybees, yellow is bumblebees, and then there's all sorts of other things, right? And so put a little blue star up there. So the top two most attractive plants are lavender and rhododendron. Now, it's probably at least in part because everybody plants them. And it's also because bumblebees really like them. See how much yellow is on those graphs? There's a lot of bumblebees. But again, in my search for a more inclusive kind of plant, the two with the red stars. So number 12 here is aster. Look at all the different colors. And number 14 is calendula. Again, see all the different colors? So they're attracting more diversity of flowers. Okay. So my take-home messages for tonight, in addition to things like pollen pants and naughty bits and the other things that obviously were resonating with you guys. First, thank a bee for 1 out of 3. It's kind of a good thing to remember. Um, anything other than the wind pollinated plants in our diet, like rice and wheat, is bee pollinated if it's plants, right? So thank a bee for 1 out of 3 bites you eat. Habitat loss is the main cause of wild pollinator declines. I told you the three interacting reasons. The main thing for wild pollinators is loss of habitat. We have a lot of bee species, as many as we have birds. 500 species of bees in British Columbia, and we keep discovering new ones because we just don't know that much about them. And if you want to support them in a garden or in another space, the thing to do is to plant some food, especially easy access flowers. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share so I can take questions if there are any. And thank you so much. So let me stop and, and answer any questions if any of you have them. And you can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat or not. No?
Have a question in the chat. Do you need to clean a bee house? That's a tongue twister
Yeah.
for me.
Thanks for that. Yeah, you do. So one of the reasons why managed bees can transmit diseases is because they're in high density. And in a way, when you have a bee house, you're increasing the density artificially of the mason bees that would use that bee house. And so you can get parasites and other things building up in it. So it is a good idea in early fall to take down your bee house, open it up, clean out the cocoons, and get rid of any that have high parasite loads. And there's the the website for that bee verse has information. I'll put it in the chat. Has information about how to do it. Alternatively, a friend of mine who's a mason bee expert, what he does is he takes a piece of firewood. So again, if you're handy and you have access to such things, and he just drills holes into the firewood, into a piece of firewood and puts it out for a year, uses it for a year or two, and by then he's starting to wonder about parasites and things building up in it. With a drilled hole, you can't really clean it. So what he does is the next spring, he very loosely puts something like saran wrap, plastic wrap over the top, and attaches it on loosely again, and with holes in it. And the bees can get out through the holes, but new bees won't find their way in to use it again. And then he tosses it on the pile and burns it in his wood burning stove. All right, so there's other ways to do it to kind of um, deal with that same issue of parasite buildup. So either discard it, like you would discard if you use paper fill tubes, or clean it out. So it's um, not so much about the product. You can just use I'm pretty sure Marguerite Dogstrom always said just use water. So you just empty it out and brush it out. You can use a mild bleach solution on the wood of the bee house itself, but make sure it's very mild and clean it back out. And that would be more if you're worried about mold or fungus. So the big thing is to get out any of those parasites. There's going to be parasitoid wasps and other kinds of critters that are in there and mites. Um, yeah, so I've seen like bees that hatch out and they just get covered with mites and they're going to basically suck out their equivalent of blood and they're not going to make it. So you want to clean those out of your house. Okay, what size variation? The normal for a blue orchard bee, which is just one species of mason bees, the ones that are sold commercially is 5/16 of an inch. And I apologize that I don't know the metric equivalent. You want to go down to 2 or 3/16 of an inch at the small end, and you can go up again by 2 or 3/16 of an inch to, maybe half an inch. And that variation will accommodate a greater diversity of bees that use those homes. And you might have noticed in the picture, it wasn't drilled holes, it was routers. You guys know what a router is? Like where so it would almost be like the spaces between my fingers are just grooves that are hollowed out, and then you put another piece of wood on top of that. So it's not a hole, it's like a U-shaped thing. And that's way easier to clean. And so if you're gonna be handy and make it, like if you guys ever decided to do, any kind of workshop, that's the way to do it is to router it. And don't go all the way out the back so that it's closed in the back, and then stack them on top of each other. Yeah. I can see you're handy because you're picturing it. Yeah. Uh, okay. Leave the leaves. One of the things I keep saying I'm going to do is just do some myth busting, write a book about myth busting, all the memes that show up in social media, at least for me, probably for you. And one of them is Leave the Leaves, and the other one that's coming up will be No Mow May. And I hate them both. So and mostly because they don't apply to British Columbia. So most of British Columbia is coniferous forest, not deciduous forest. And so most of our and I'll just pause on that, right? Mostly coniferous forests. Second, bees were never in those leaves anyway. It was always things like butterflies or fireflies or other kinds of insects. Bees are, I told you, they're in the ground, or they might be in hollow stems of plants. They're not in leaves. They don't use leaves. But in places where there's deciduous forest, butterflies will use those leaves, right? And moths will use those leaves, and other things will use them. But here, most of our butterflies are overwintering in bark crevices, not in the leaves. Some are in the leaves, but again, we don't have a lot of deciduous trees throughout the province. Um, you should still leave your leaves though. So, but it's not because there's bees in there. It's because it's great for your soil. So if you can leave the leaves on the soil surface, those nutrients will get back into your soil rather than taking all of that. That's free. That's free fertilizer. Leave it for the fertilizer benefits of it, and also it insulates the soil. So the bees that are in the ground in the winter, like queen bumblebees, are kept warmer. It's like having a little blanket on top of them. Um, the don't do any garden cleanup stuff also refers to the bees that are nesting in those hollow tubes. So if they're not in a mason bee house, but they're in a plant stem, the thing to remember there is it's like a 3-year enterprise. So year one, the plant grows and flowers. Year two, the bees, if you cut off just the flower heads and leave the rest of the stem, the bees nest in that stem. Year three, they emerge. So it's a commitment that you would leave some hollow plant stems in your garden. I don't think you need to leave them in every